the much-anticipated UK version of Alone has finally arrived. Same old rules. No script, no camera crew. The last one standing wins $1 million, but they can only bring 10 specific tools with them. Not only do they need to build shelters to withstand the cold, but they also have to forage for food in territories roamed by black bears and wolves. Soon, 10 good-looking guys and gals were dropped off along the banks of the Mackenzie River, inside the Arctic Circle. Right after landing, contestant Louis got busy setting traps because he spotted a squirrel up in the trees and lots of black bear tracks on the ground. Catching them early on would make the upcoming challenges a lot easier. This guy is a lucky yet unlucky fella. Lucky because he has a beautiful girlfriend, but unlucky because, as a worker at the bottom of the ladder, he can't afford a dowry to propose. So, he's here with a rock-solid belief that he'll take home that $1 million prize. But how would someone who's always lived in a big city know about the harshness of the wilderness? Soon enough, Louis was sweating bullets. He wanted to stop for a sip of water, but ended up grabbing a handful of muddy, stinky water that he couldn't bring himself to drink. Next up is a real beauty, clearly a bit bewildered on her first day in the wild. It took Naomi, a designer from Paris, who's always been in the fashion scene but loves outdoor sports, a good while to come to grips with reality. She camps out in the wild every year, which has given her a clear understanding of the 4 essentials of survival. Safety always comes first in an unfamiliar environment, so she decided to build a shelter first. But not long into the jungle, she found bear tracks and saw tree trunks all messed up, which freaked her out. How big must an animal be to cause such destruction? She quickly lifted her axe to bolster her courage and moved forward as quietly as possible. After finally finding a suitable clearing, she heard strange noises from afar and didn't hesitate. She ran out fast. She wanted to drink some water to calm her nerves, but looked down to find fresh tracks. Turning her head, she saw a moose bathing. Naomi's breathing quickened. If she could take it down, she could win this lying down. But all she had was an axe, clearly not enough to take on such a big creature. She could only watch as her protein source disappeared. The next to enter should be a big shot. A 49-year-old logger named Mike, radiating confidence and wisdom. He spent years working and living in deep, dense forests, which not only built his robust physique, but also honed his survival skills. Unlike other contestants who rush around aimlessly, Mike explores the terrain with a plan and purpose. He quickly found a spot sheltered from the wind and facing the sun. To avoid predators, Mike planned to build an elevated house on stilts. There's no shortage of timber here. Given enough time, he could build a Wall Street out here. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but even the heavens seem unable to watch anymore.
I can't fucking believe.
Look at the size of that wound. He definitely needs stitches, or it's not going to hold, they said. Mike immediately made a distress call, and the plane that was just about to clock out had to go back to work. Talk about a change in attitude, from cocky to panic in a flash. The doctor quickly patched Mike up, and we all thought he'd soldier on despite the injury. But surprisingly, he threw in the towel right there and then. Man, we thought he was a survival guru, but he tapped out in less than 4 hours. Mike just set the record for the fastest solo exit in the show's history. This unexpected turn of events totally blindsided the production team. To keep the show going, they had to bring in a substitute contestant, Pip, at the last minute. But with only a few hours left until dark, she had to hustle to build a shelter to hide in or risk a nighttime bear attack. As soon as contestant Eva landed, she spotted a huge footprint. Before she could even guess what beast it belonged to, she heard a cub's whistle not far off.
There's a bear. Oh, I'm shaking.
Luckily, the crew wasn't too far away and managed to chase off the little critter looking to make friends. Turns out, this place isn't just home to black bears. It's also a hunting ground for cougars and wolves. After hearing that, Eva felt like she definitely underbought on her accidental injury insurance. Next up, we have Keon, a city boy who's lived his whole 19 years in the urban jungle. This is his first time in the actual wilderness, wandering around like a curious baby all day. It was getting late when he finally remembered to set up his tent, and he picked the lakeshore of all places, practically rolling out the welcome mat for any beasts coming to drink at night. Talk about delivering themselves as takeout. But you can't entirely blame his youthful ignorance. His survival knowledge comes from online survival gurus. Compared to Keon's risky moves, Louis was much more cautious. He found a clearing deep in the woods and built a temporary shelter against a big tree, even starting a fire in front of the camp. Now, with water, fire, and shelter sorted, all he needed was food to really get ahead of the other contestants. He kept exploring deeper into the forest, hoping to snag some grouse for stew. Longtime fans of the show know that contestants with bows get a buff, increasing their chances of scoring some protein. But, of course, that's only if you can find prey.
Hey, 2 ducks in the water there. Look how close to...
When Louis saw one, he quietly moved closer, waiting until a plump duck swam into range. He didn't hesitate to release the bowstring. He hit the target, all right, but the arrowhead broke in two, and just like that, dinner flew away. Louis couldn't stop complaining. Before coming here, he dreamt about taking down a bear with a bow and arrow, and now he couldn't even handle a small bird. As it got darker, the calls of wild beasts began to echo all around. Contestants who hadn't made good fires were visibly tense, hurriedly trying to get their fires going. Here, fire isn't just for boiling water or keeping warm, it's mainly for warding off wild animal attacks. But not everyone has Louis' skills. Most of these challengers are rookies, struggling to get a fire going until their hands are worn raw. Eva landed and immediately ran into a black bear. She didn't even make it past this first challenge, her eyes filled with sheer despair. But it turned out the wilderness at night was far more terrifying than she had imagined. After dusk, the nearby wolves started howling, their cries echoing throughout the forest. Those with tents were somewhat okay, but those without shivered uncontrollably, instinctively grabbing their weapons. Eventually, time moved on to the next day, and all the contestants had survived the tough first night, though Naomi looked particularly pale, probably scared and starved by the bear encounter. I thought she'd move and set up anew, but she decided just to rebuild a wooden shelter. As she busied herself, more wild roars could be heard not too far off. Despite saying she wasn't scared, Naomi noticeably sped up her work, quickly finishing an A-frame structure. On the other hand, Eva still hadn't managed to start a fire because she was afraid to drink the dirty lake water. She had been dehydrated for over 24 hours. If she couldn't get fresh water today, she'd have to quit the competition in tears. Maybe it was her determination that touched the heavens because, after struggling for 2 hours, she finally got a fire going. It was the second day of the survival challenge, and bright and early, Louis was already staked out by the river, waiting for the duck he missed yesterday to return. He was still hung up on not having roast duck, but his growling stomach helped him face reality. He collected some cattails from the bank, cleaned them, and boiled them back at camp. The cattail soup smelled a bit like mashed potatoes but tasted awful, like something from a sewer. Frustrated, Louis grabbed his bow and arrow again and headed out, this time aiming for a squirrel he saw while gathering firewood. It didn't take long for him to hear a squirrel, and looking up, he spotted one sunning itself. Louis crept closer, took a deep breath, and shot his arrow, hitting the squirrel immediately. But as the squirrel fell, it got caught in a tree. Between climbing and chopping the tree down, Louis went for the simpler option. As the tree fell, the squirrel was flung out, and despite searching, Louis couldn't find it. His meal flew away again, and in frustration, he threw his axe down. After spending a perilous night in the woods, everyone realized the importance of a solid shelter and got busy building permanent ones. However, Elise wasn't having much luck. Her frame kept swaying with the wind and wouldn't stabilize. Frustrated and confused, she ranted at the camera. She had followed the teacher's instructions to the letter, so why wasn't it working? She fiddled with it but couldn't find a solution, and eventually, the frame just collapsed. Angry, Elise vented her frustration to the camera, claiming that none of the techniques taught by their teacher were useful at all. At the moment, Kian was scouting for a new campsite. The black bear had hassled him all night long. Before it left, the bear kindly left behind some breakfast, glistening and appetizing, but Kian didn't dare eat it and quickly fled the troublesome spot. He found a more open area and decided to set up camp there. He grabbed his axe and started chopping down trees to build a shelter. But after felling just one tree, he was so exhausted he collapsed on the ground. Just as he was about to lie down for a rest, he heard the black bear roar in the distance. Kian's expression instantly turned serious, and he started trembling uncontrollably. He was really scared, but too embarrassed to say he wanted out. All he could do was grit his teeth at the camera and say he could last a few more days. Naomi finally finished her day's work and went to the lake for a cold water bath to relieve her fatigue. After her bath, Naomi felt very comfortable. But as the sun clocked out for the day, the contestants' nerves started to tighten again. Listening to the wolves howling in the distance, they could only curl up in their shelters, shivering. And the unwelcome visitor that showed up at midnight scared them into continuous screams. No one dared to sleep, fearing they wouldn't see the next day's sun. They barely made it through to dawn, but seeing the branches broken by the black bear filled Kian with dread. He thought about going to the lake to calm his nerves, but tripped over a branch instead. That became the final straw that broke him. Kian declared that surviving in the wild was too hard and nothing like what he had imagined. Although he dreamt of becoming an explorer, his father's vast fortune still needed an heir. So, he decisively made a call on his satellite phone.
I sent the message, I said I want to tap out. That's it, there's no going back now.
On the third day of the survival challenge, Louis was so hungry, he started eating ants. They tasted surprisingly good and had way more protein than beef, but there wasn't nearly enough meat on them to fill him up without a few thousand ants. He had to go out in search of other game. Although he didn't encounter any black bears or moose, he found the squirrel he had lost the day before. It looked like it had been gnawed on by some other animal, but Louis didn't mind. He figured it'd be fine as long as he cooked it well, since getting some meat in the wild was too hard. He eagerly started to feast. It wasn't just his taste buds that were satisfied. It also warmed his faltering heart. While Louis was busily chewing on protein, the other contestants were busy in the berry patch. Naomi carefully peeled the berries before eating them, always so meticulous in whatever she does. In contrast, Javid was much less careful, packing away berries of all sizes, along with some leaves. But how long can berries last? Here, protein is king. Clearly, Eva understood this as she took out her fishing net to catch fish, though the net looked like it was disposable. It's hard to understand how these people chose their equipment. Naomi's even more impressive. She decided not to go with a fishing net and chose to make her own instead. I initially thought she was just a pretty face brought in by the production team, but it turns out she's a hidden survival expert. Her homemade net is all about being exquisite and durable. There's a reason Naomi is so careful. During college, she and her boyfriend didn't take enough precautions, and she ended up getting pregnant and becoming a single mom. What really pissed her off was that the guy just disappeared without a trace. Since then, Naomi has been extremely cautious, vowing not to let anything slip by. Next up is Alan. He's got years of forestry management under his belt and really knows his stuff when it comes to plant habits. He stated that Berries like these don't provide much energy. Gathering them is just a waste of effort. But his target is this type of clover, which not only cuts through the grease, but also fills you up. Alan used to have a happy family of 4, but his daughter's illness drained all his resources. This challenge is a great opportunity for him. Winning the prize money could change his situation.
So I need the money, and I will carry on until I win.
Alan, scratching his head, made a bold statement and then continued to collect berries. Soon, he found animal droppings on the ground, still steaming, clearly indicating the animal was nearby. Alan's face turned pale instantly. On day 5 of the survival challenge, after eating the last piece of squirrel meat, Louis finally started to get serious about chopping trees. His plan was to build a sturdy, safe fortress before winter arrived, preparing for future bear hunting. From choosing materials to handling details, it was clear Louis was putting his heart into it. But his building skills definitely needed improvement. A gust of wind easily knocked down his wooden wall. A whole day's effort was wasted, which really infuriated him. Despite his frustration, considering the $1 million prize, he had to keep going. Before Louis could adjust his mood, another collapse of the wooden wall occurred. This time, he completely gave up. After a day of hard labor and having already burned through the meat he had eaten, he could only take out a treasured squirrel head and some rotten vegetable leaves to make a soup. He was well aware that after this meal, he didn't know when his next one would be, so he ate very carefully, gnawing the squirrel head into a specimen. Naomi, though she managed to weave a fishing net, hasn't caught any fish over the past few days. Craving protein, she finally mustered up the courage to venture into the jungle. But she didn't get far before a foul smell hit her. Approaching, she found a dead animal, suggesting there might be predators nearby. Naomi quickly dashed out of the jungle. That night, the distant howling sounds made her incredibly anxious. This is a common worry for all contestants, because you never know when a predator might show up right at your doorstep for a surprise romantic jungle encounter. Laura, terrified, didn't dare close her eyes all night, especially since her tent offers no protection. She's a kayaking enthusiast who once crossed the Atlantic with her team, but her survival skills are seriously lacking. She couldn't even figure out how to set up an A-frame. Luckily, she remembered something about the stability of triangles, which helped her barely manage to complete this challenging task. By day 6, Alan's fishing net was still a work in progress. After 2 days of weaving, he was exhausted and desperately wished his girlfriend could give him a massage. Meanwhile, Tom, having eaten fish, was feeling quite confident. He spent days fishing by the river, but whether the fish had gotten smarter or his fishing skills were lacking, he couldn't figure out why the fish kept escaping at the riverbank. After a day of pondering over this on a rock, Eva was equally baffled as to why her net caught no fish. It wasn't until she picked up a giant skull on her way back that she realized her fish were probably being stolen by this creature. If I'm not mistaken, that fish probably died unfairly. As time moved on to day 8, it seemed to be Elisa's time of the month, as indicated by her drying pants. Drinking more hot water was definitely a good idea, since she couldn't find any other food. Laura, on the other hand, saw no changes. The shelter she started building a few days ago was still just a bare tripod. With no progress on the shelter and no food found, she spent her days crying in her tent, making one wonder what she was doing here. After stopping her tears, Laura finally took out her satellite phone.
Yes, I'm officially tapping out.
We're now on day 9 of the survival challenge, and there are still 8 people left. Lately, Tom hasn't been able to catch any fish and suspects there's something wrong with the fake bait he's been using. So, he decided to catch a dragonfly to test it out. To his surprise, switching to the dragonfly worked wonders, and fish started biting like crazy. But every time he was about to reel them in, the fish would slip off the hook, almost driving him mad. Luckily, The new bait proved its worth, so he kept at it, casting his line again and again. Just as the sun was coming up, Tom felt a strong tug on his rod. Learning from his past mistakes, he didn't try to reel it in directly. Instead, he ran to the shore, dragging the line with him. Just as the fish was about to slip off the hook again, he grabbed a club and went after it. A few good hits, and the fish was out of energy. Looking at his catch, Tom finally cracked a satisfied smile, showed off his catch to the camera, and boasted a bit. Good ingredients need just simple cooking to turn into a delicious meal, and Tom couldn't wait to dig in. Meanwhile, Louis has been busy building a shelter but still makes time every day to go out with his bow and arrows in search of protein. Today, he saw a flock of geese fly by and realized he's running out of time. As the weather cools, fish move to deeper waters, making fishing even harder. Louis quickly brought out the squirrel guts he'd been saving for his fishing adventure. Compared to the amateur fishing rods of the other contestants, Louis's rod is top-notch. Paired with this stinky bait, he should have a good catch. Before he could finish his thought, a fish bit. He scrambled to pull in the line, but just as the fish was about to reach shore, it slipped off the hook. This left Louis ranting and cursing frustratedly. Ever since encountering a black bear by the river, Alan's lost interest in fishing. He spends his days searching the jungle, hoping to hunt a bear. His method is pretty brutal, setting up large spring traps on the paths where bears frequently walk. Of course, he doesn't pass up the squirrels either, setting dozens of snares near their dens, which greatly increases his protein catch rate. At this point, Elise has finished building her shelter and is now focused on making tools and finding food. She's quite confident in her fishing skills, especially now during trout spawning season, and is all set for grilling fish with her campfire ready. Her casting skills look professional, but she didn't account for the wind speed and direction, and ended up hooking her thigh. After making some adjustments, she got better at casting. She kept at it all day until it grew dark without a single bite. Having fished for over 20 years, Elise has never had such a bad day and sat down on the ground, starting to question her life choices. Naomi was sitting by the river, lost in thought, wondering if she should quit the challenge. Since arriving, she had been surviving on berries, never seeing any protein. Now, with the berries near camp running low, she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Eva, looking at the wild duck hanging up, stood by the shore, lost in admiration for 3 whole hours. She mentioned she had been a vegetarian for 5 years and was always grateful, not wanting to kill anymore.
It's a duck in my gill net.
But what Eva did next totally floored me. She expertly plucked and gutted the duck in one smooth motion, even arranging the organs neatly. A real pro at butchering. Good ingredients need just simple cooking to become a delicious meal. And this additive-free, iron-grilled duck was just that. One bite, and the rich, lingering taste of the meat had Eva literally jumping for joy. On the other side, after 9 days of hard work, Pip finally made herself a home in the wilderness. Although it wasn't perfect in craftsmanship or materials, at least it was a wooden shelter, good enough to scare off any wolves. Having never seen protein since she arrived in these wild mountains, Pip couldn't miss the opportunity when she spotted a partridge in a tree. She quickly made a primitive bird catcher and set it up under a large tree in the forest, even using some berries as bait. Could she actually catch a partridge? Since his fishing hook came off last time, Louis had been at home improving his gear. Today, before starting, he held his fishing rod and prayed, then went to the river to fish. His specially blessed fishing rod really worked wonders, and soon a fish was on the hook. This time, Louis didn't rush to pull it ashore, but slowly adjusted the line, taking a gradual approach to fishing. When the fish let its guard down, he quickly lifted the rod and successfully dragged the fish ashore. Looking at a week's worth of meals, Louis couldn't help but howl with joy. feeling both satisfied and happy. Then the camera cut away, and there it was. Delicious roasted fish, golden and sizzling. One bite was packed with protein, making Naomi's life seem all the more miserable in comparison. Today, her fishing net caught nothing again, and she had to settle for some wild grass seeds. To add some flavor, she even roasted them over a fire. This scratchy grass seed skewer harshly gave her a taste of barbecue. Time quickly moved on to day 10. Early in the morning, Pip dragged her weak body to check her bird trap. The bait has disappeared, but the trap mechanism has not been triggered. Strangely, there were plenty of partridges running around her camp, yet she couldn't catch a single one. Meanwhile, Alan wasn't faring any better. His hunting traps had also caught nothing. Waiting any longer might starve him to death, so he decided to try his luck by the river. Didn't catch any fish and ended up all wet. Anyone would be a bit upset about that. Meanwhile, good news came from the other side of the river. After a whole day's effort, Elise finally caught a fish just before dark. It was a bit of a scramble, but she managed to pull it ashore. It was a small one, but Elise was beaming with joy. The survival challenge was now on day 11. Alan got to the riverbank before dawn, thinking the early morning was the best time to catch fish. He hadn't finished speaking when his rod bent with a fish. He was so excited, he was nearly incoherent. After a frantic struggle, he managed to haul in a big one. Seeing the fish still struggling, Alan quickly ended its pain with a knife. After more than 10 days, he was finally going to eat meat. He rushed back to camp to start a fire and cook. Soon, the smell of cooking meat filled the wilderness, and Alan couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed the undercooked fish head and started gnawing on it. Meanwhile, Naomi hadn't seen any protein yet because her hunting skills were almost non-existent. Her only hope lay in the fishing net in the river. Besides checking her net every day, she spent her remaining time designing and building her wooden hut, which turned out to be the most luxurious shelter of the season. It had flowers on the roof, a solid wood bed inside, and a fenced yard outside, where she could sit around a stove and make tea. But all these comforts weren't enough to survive on. She needed a sustainable food source. So today, she sat by the riverbank praying for a long time before she cautiously went to check her net. Soon, Naomi dragged a big fish ashore. To make sure it was completely dead, she hit it a few extra times with a stone. Starving for over 10 days, she ignored the camera and started devouring the fish. The fat, juicy meat melted in her mouth. It was so delicious she couldn't stop eating. By the end, Naomi was so moved she cried. Across the river, Eva was struggling with hunger. Since catching a duck last time, her net had come up empty. As she considered quitting the challenge, she remembered the crew's reminder that the Kenzie River had not only fish, but also shellfish. So she decided to try her luck in the river. She quickly found something, but it turned out to be an empty shell. However, this gave Eva a huge boost of confidence. Perseverance would surely pay off. But as the sun set and her pants soaked through, she still hadn't found a single edible shell. Day 12 came quickly. Javid reappeared after several days. Recently, he'd been roaming the jungle, hoping to find a black bear's den. But in the end, all he found were a few small caves. With bear hunting looking hopeless, he shifted his focus to smaller animals. Just as he was setting traps, a partridge suddenly popped up nearby. Faced with this unexpected source of protein, Javid wouldn't let it go. He immediately grabbed a stick and charged. But the next second,
Shit.
There goes that element of surprise.
not only did he fail to hit the grouse, he nearly lost an eye. It was extreme bad luck. Elise isn't doing much better either. So far, she's only caught a tiny fish, and her exhaustion has hit its limit. Her usually reliable fishing skills aren't working out here. If this keeps up, she might have to quit the challenge. But she's not ready to give up just yet. In the evening, Elise went back to the river to check her nets, and, finally, luck was on her side. A shiny big fish was hanging in the net. The small fish she caught before wasn't even enough to pick her teeth with, but this one could feed her for a week. Today marks day 13 in the wilderness for him. Louis was up early, digging in the dirt for something. It turned out to be the 2 big fish he caught last night. Since he didn't have time to deal with them then, he buried them temporarily. This isn't a great long-term way to store fish, so Louis decided to dig them up for smoking. He took the fish to the river to clean them, and they were still pretty fresh. Then he sliced up the fish to smoke on a rack, using the leftover heads and bones to make a pot of soup. Suddenly, surviving in the wild felt more like a vacation, with delicious fish that you just can't stop eating. Especially the fins. You suck on them and get that burst of flavor right up to your crown. By the end, Louis had even polished off the bones. Now, with all this smoked fish, as long as nothing goes wrong, winning seems just around the corner. After being absent for a few days, Tom finally finished building his permanent shelter. You can tell he put a lot of heart into his choice of materials and the details. The overall effect even made the other contestants blush. Tom is almost set now. All he needs is to find enough food, and he could be a strong contender for the $1 million prize. However, when he checked his fishing net, he noticed the water level in the Kenzie River had dropped significantly. Yesterday's submerged net was now out in the sun. Since fishing was out of the question, Tom decided to head into the mountains to hunt for game. Soon, he spotted a grouse on the treetop. Since he didn't bring his bow and arrows, he had to improvise and made a wooden stick snare on the spot. But his efforts didn't just fail to catch the grouse, they scared it away. Meanwhile, Eva was by the river gathering wood when she looked up and saw a terrifying scene, which made her rush back to her shelter. The sudden storm caught everyone off guard. At night, the trees around seemed to be dancing wildly, and the contestants under them were on edge. Those with sturdy shelters managed to lie down for a bit of rest, but those who only had a tarp over their heads had to sit up, ready to run at any moment. By day 14, everyone had somehow made it through the harrowing night, but everyone felt differently. Elise heard the wind and the wolves howling, which scared her straight till dawn. Tom was just grateful he had moved earlier. Otherwise, he'd be nothing but a soul standing here now. Alan realized the importance of building a house. After breakfast, he started chopping down trees, but after only one tree, he sat down, already hungry. Building a permanent shelter could wait, but fishing was a daily necessity. To survive till the end and win that $1 million, he needed to catch as much fish as possible before they moved back to deeper waters. Luckily, fishing today didn't disappoint him. The fish were biting quickly, and he pulled up another heavy one, which was more than enough to fill him up. However, as the saying goes, drought kills some, floods others. Javed hadn't seen any protein yet. Although he had set traps all over the forest, no small animals were caught. He was also desperately fishing every day, but the fish kept breaking his line. Javed felt out of place here, clearly struggling to adapt. On day 15, Louis went to check his traps early in the morning.
I've got dinner. 2 squirrels.
Then, he couldn't wait any longer and quickly reached out. With a snap, he broke the squirrel's neck. At this point, Louis was way ahead of the other contestants. Not only did he have plenty of fish stored up at home, but now he had a new source of food. Winning the challenge was just a matter of time. But even with all these advantages, he still couldn't shake off the emptiness inside. He felt a loneliness here like never before. Pip is definitely the most laid-back survival contestant. She's been surviving on just a pot of grouse soup. Other than checking her bird traps daily, she spends most of her time zoning out in her shelter. Even filming for the show seems too much effort. Today, she unexpectedly made an appearance and surprisingly whipped out a satellite phone.
Hi, this is Pip. I'm officially tapping out, please.
Probably the smartest decision she could make. After all, winning the championship in her current state seemed unrealistic. Might as well head home early and enjoy the comfy life. After Pip left, there were only 7 people left in the competition, and life wasn't great for those who remained. Besides having to go out daily to find food, they were constantly overworking to fortify their shelters for the coming winter. By day 16, Tom woke up to find ice in his iron pot and the plants in the forest sporting new skins, all signs that winter was sneaking in. Eva felt it the most since her house was just a waterproof cloth. She had hoped to find some berries for breakfast, but they were so shriveled up they were inedible. As the berries withered and fell, the days ahead for the contestants were going to get even tougher. Eva, looking up at the migrating birds in the sky, could only sigh in frustration at not having a bow and arrow to shoot a few down for a taste test. Elise's fishing net hadn't caught any fish. She could only rely on picking berries to survive. Now, she walked weakly and wobbled, almost falling into the river while pulling her net. After much effort, she managed to drag the net ashore, but it was still empty. Elise sat helplessly on the bank, wondering whether to keep pushing on.
Look inside you and be strong, and you'll finally see the truth.
As long as Alan had eaten, he would start performing. Today, he put on a solo concert. After the show, he started messing with an anthill, determined to catch a few ants for a snack. Unfortunately, after eating them, he suffered badly, his stomach churning so much that he threw up his dinner from the night before. Javed spent the morning yelling at a squirrel up a tree, as if begging it to jump down and give him a bite. As the only contestant this season who hadn't eaten any meat, his eyes turned green at the sight of any small animal. Unfortunately, today's fishing net was still empty, and he had to continue gathering berries to barely get by. But misfortune followed, and it seemed like bad luck always targeted the suffering. After eating the berries, he had an allergic reaction, his back covered in red bumps. Looking at his clearly emaciated chest and skinny legs, thoughts of quitting started to sprout in his mind. Despite Louis having meat every day, the inner emptiness and loneliness always haunted him, with thoughts of his girlfriend's graceful figure constantly in his mind. By day 17 of the survival challenge, even though he went out hunting, he hadn't caught anything, so he had to dig into his stored food supply and prepare to enjoy a hearty meal. Among the 7 remaining contestants, Louis was undoubtedly living the most comfortably. He not only had a luxury log cabin as a shelter, but he also had plenty of food. As long as he didn't drop out because he missed home, winning the $1 million prize was almost a sure thing. After eating his fill, Louis started to get busy, clearing the messy branches from his doorstep. After tidying up, the view in front of his shelter opened up, turning it into a lakeview cabin. He even made a nameplate, carved with his and his family's names, and he wanted to attach his girlfriend's photo too. But when he picked up the photo, he couldn't bring himself to let go, his eyes gradually moistening as he missed her more and more. Faced with the choice between the $1 million prize and going home to be with his girlfriend, Louis, struggling internally, finally decided to choose the latter.
It's Louis, and I'm officially tapping out.
As the most promising seed contestant, his departure due to the emptiness and loneliness in his heart was truly regrettable. In the end, he packed up the food he hadn't finished and a few furs he had collected. These were not only his trophies from these days, but also the only gifts he could bring back for his girlfriend. Alan and Louis had completely different attitudes towards life. Alan was always thinking about how to get more food, and he would run to the river to fish whenever he had a chance. As the lake's water level continued to drop, he started eyeing the mussels in the lake. However, Now that the temperature had dropped to below freezing, the cold made Alan really uncomfortable. What frustrated him even more was that after spending half a day groping in the icy water, he only found a few empty mussel shells. Unfortunately, his bad luck hadn't ended yet.
Oh God, please.
Now, Alan's foot was cut by a mussel shell. Does this foreshadow an even worse situation for him? Naomi, apart from not finding any food, everything else was normal. She still persisted in building her shelter on an empty stomach and had completed the insulation work and planned to build a fireplace inside. This way, even if she took off all her clothes inside, she wouldn't feel cold. However, this also made me a bit worried. I wonder if the fireplace might accidentally set the shelter on fire. Although he had been hungry for most of the month, Tom's condition was still not bad, stable apart from the lack of food. Today, he finally found some high-end ingredients, but to catch them, he needed to make a few mouse traps. He used 2 sticks for support and placed a large rock on top, creating a simple falling rock trap. As soon as a mouse touches the trap, it will immediately be crushed by the rock. Now, he just needs to wait for delivery. As the weather got colder, the fish moved to deeper water, and Elise hasn't been able to catch any in the past few days. Her only hope was pinned on the fish net in the river. The good news is the net was still there. But the bad news is that a beaver had stolen the fish and even chewed up her fishing rod into pieces. Facing this sad situation, even tough Elise couldn't help but cry. Time flew by, and everyone welcomed day 20 on an empty stomach. Elise was so hungry she couldn't even get out of bed, just daydreaming about eating pizza and burgers to keep going. Meanwhile, Tom's camp was overrun with mice, and the traps he had set earlier were completely useless. Everyone was enduring hunger, hoping to outlast the other contestants. By day 23, Javed couldn't take it anymore and called to drop out.
It's Javed. I'm tapping out.
He was one of the unluckiest contestants this season, having not eaten any protein from the start and surviving only on berries. The survival challenge reached day 25, and suddenly Tom heard a noise from the mousetrap. He opened it to find a mouse inside, an unexpected surprise that thrilled him, as it meant a new source of food to help him make it to the final round. Considering the mouse might carry salmonella, he cooked it until crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside to ensure it was safe. Taking a bite, it was delicious and packed with more protein than beef. Meanwhile, Alan could only sigh at the sight of a grouse, regretting not bringing a bow and arrow to catch such tasty prey. Eventually, Alan decided to try making a birdcage himself. His craftsmanship was pretty rough. If such a makeshift cage actually caught a bird, I'd eat my hat. Naomi checked the fishing net daily, but came back empty-handed again today. It had been 7 days since she last ate fish, and her stomach was so empty it was growling. If she couldn't find food soon, she might have to drop out. Reluctantly, she tried fishing with a rod. Standing in the cold wind for a long time, she finally had a fish bite.
No! No! Oh! I got one and it frickin' went back in.
But it was another failure that left her sitting by the river crying. Today was her son's birthday, and she could endure the hunger, cold, and loneliness. But her longing for her son grew stronger. Looking at his photo, her emotions surged like a tide, wishing she could fly to be with him right away. The show allowed contestants to carry photos of their family, which actually turned out to be a trap, as many contestants had chosen to drop out after looking at their photos. To see her son every day, Naomi even made a special frame and hung it in a prominent place in her shelter. On day 26, Tom started fishing early in the morning, but the fish escaped before he could fully reel it in, making him complain while casting his line again. Despite the river being full of fish, their wariness was a real test of his fishing skills. So, Tom kept casting for over an hour, seeing a glimmer of hope at times, but due to his lack of experience, the big fish slipped the hook again, letting a sure source of protein slip away, almost driving him crazy. Meanwhile, Alan's luck showed no signs of improving. Although the birdcage he had high hopes for was triggered, it was empty, tempting him to consider quitting. Having not consumed any protein for days, he had to start using his reserved food supplies. At this point, everyone was starving, but he was fortunate enough to still have food to eat. After a satisfying meal, he couldn't help but think of his wife back home, suddenly making the attractive prize money seem less appealing and leading him to question the point of continuing. Eva was having the toughest time among all the contestants. Except for a duck she stumbled upon early in the game, she hadn't managed to get any protein since. As the challenge deepened, she couldn't suppress her cravings for delicious food, especially the tantalizing taste of roasted chicken drumsticks that kept popping up in her mind. Eventually, to satisfy her taste buds, she decisively pulled out her satellite phone.
I'm tapping out today, please.
Clearly, she was using the survival challenge as a diet plan. Now that she had achieved her ideal figure, there was no need for her to stay and suffer from hunger. After Eva officially left the competition area, the remaining contestants received a text message from the production team congratulating them on making it to the final four. Today marked day 27 of the challenge. Naomi, as usual, checked her fishing net, although she had returned empty-handed for several days and her hopes were fading. However, this time, she couldn't believe her eyes as a 5-pound fish suddenly appeared in her net, a surprise too sudden to anticipate. With this big fish, Naomi felt winning the championship was within reach. She quickly and skillfully processed the fish, frying pieces of it until golden brown. Before the aroma could even spread, she eagerly began to feast. Meanwhile, fishing enthusiast Tom injured his wrist due to a mishap. He had to set traps in the jungle, hoping to catch some voles. Unfortunately, although a trap was triggered, it only caught the leg of the prey. If the trap had caught the head, the situation might have been different. After checking all the traps and finding nothing, Tom felt at a loss. If he lost all sources of food, he might have to quit due to starvation. The challenge reached day 28, and Alan was dizzy with hunger, his eyes dim. Since he had eaten the last of his stored fish, he hadn't been able to find any food. Both his body and spirit were on the verge of collapse. Now, his only hope lay in the traps he had set in the woods, hoping to catch some protein. Deciding to gamble with fate, Alan hoped to stay in the challenge by hunting. If the traps yielded something, he would continue. If not, he would quit. However, fate didn't seem to be on his side. After checking over a dozen traps and finding nothing, a disheartened Alan finally accepted his fate. Since destiny had clearly shown its hand, he felt there was no point in struggling any longer. He decisively pulled out his satellite phone, ready to end it all. It's really a shame Alan had to drop out. At the start of the competition, not only did he have plenty of food, but he also had the best living conditions. If he hadn't shifted his focus too much to hunting and neglected fishing, he might have had a great shot at winning. Now, even the strongest competitors are struggling to keep going. How much longer can the weaker ones last? On day 29, Elise checked her fishing net and found nothing. She decided to head into the jungle to look for food, and before leaving, she put on some smoky makeup to boost her morale. Hunger was hitting her so hard that even walking felt tough. She moved cautiously, step by step, but found the nearby traps empty and had to venture deeper into the jungle, hoping to find something to eat. As she continued, Elise unexpectedly lost her way. The surroundings all looked too similar, and hunger and exhaustion nearly shut down her ability to think, leaving her wandering in circles in the jungle. After much difficulty, she luckily stumbled upon a trap she'd set earlier and found her way back to camp. Looking back, the experience was terrifying. She almost got lost in the jungle for good. By day 30, Tom was relatively stable emotionally, despite having lost so much weight that his pants wouldn't stay up. Meanwhile, Naomi, going through her period, was in a down mood, crying almost daily. Only Elise kept pushing herself, continually setting traps in the jungle in search of food. On day 31, Naomi finally broke down. She had mild depression, and being alone in the wilderness for so long, her pessimistic and anxious feelings couldn't be held back any longer. Suddenly, the desire to win $1 million was gone, and all she could think about was going home to see her son.
Mummy's coming home, Barnaby.
Day 32 brought a turning point for Tom as he caught a huge barracuda, practically securing the championship title. At the same time, Elise, weakened by prolonged hunger, could only lay in bed struggling to survive. On day 33, Elise woke up feeling extremely unwell, weak all over, with a racing heart and dizzy head. She realized that continuing could cause irreversible damage to her health. So, she decisively pulled out her satellite phone, ready to end the challenge.
Hello? I'm tapping out.
Having survived this long on sheer willpower, Elise's performance was truly surprising. Just for that, the production team should definitely give her a bonus. On day 34, as Tom was gathering firewood, he suddenly received a call from the production team.
Hello.
We wanted to let you know you've won.